this point, I wish we had more time because I could hear from Scott all day long. But now we're going to have a distinguished panel to hear from, and I'd like to introduce Jackie Zabelski, who is the traffic anchor at WEWS TV5, who will act as the moderator and pose the questions. Jackie was born and raised in Long Island. She received a bachelor's degree in journalism from Stony Brook University and was the traffic reporter at news stations in New York before coming to Cleveland in December of 2012. Welcome, Jackie, and thank you for agreeing to be our moderator. In addition to Scott Bernstein and myself, the panel will include Congressman Bob Gibbs and Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur. Unfortunately, former Senator George Voinovich, who was scheduled to appear today, is unable to attend due to a medical reason.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'll start off by calling up Congressman Bob Gibbs, who represents Ohio's 7th Congressional District, sits on the House of Transportation and Infrastructure Committee at the House Agricultural Committee. He was chosen to chair the subcommittee on water resources and environment, a subcommittee of Transportation and Infrastructure Committee that conducts oversight of the federal regulation of clean water. He's also a member of the Republican Study Committee, a group of more than 175 House Republicans organized for the purpose of advancing a conservative social and economic agenda in the House of Representatives. The Republican Study Committee is dedicated to a limited and constitutional role for the federal government, a strong national defense, and the protection of individual and property rights, and the preservation of traditional family values. Although Congressman Gibbs has lived in Holmes County for 39 years, he grew up in Bay Village and attended Bay Village Senior High School. He was on the same graduating class as the noaca board member and current mayor of Bay Village, Deborah Sutherland. Unfortunately, Mayor Sutherland was not able to attend today. Congressman Gibbs graduated from the Ohio State University Agricultural Technical Institute and was a small businessman and farmer for more than 3 decades. Welcome, Congressman Gibbs. Congresswoman Marcy Kaptur, who represents Ohio's 9th Congressional District, is currently serving her 16th term in the U.S. House of Representatives. She is the senior-most woman in the House and the longest-serving woman from Ohio in history. Congresswoman Kaptur ranks 17th in seniority among the 435 members of the 113th Congress. She's a native Toledoan who lives in the same modest house where she grew up. She was the first member of her family to attend college, earning a bachelor's degree in history from the University of Wisconsin, and later a master's degree in urban planning from the University of Michigan. After working for 15 years as a city and regional planner, primarily in Toledo and Chicago, she accepted an appointment as the domestic policy advisor to President Jimmy Carter. During his administration, she helped maneuver 17 housing and neighborhood revitalization bills through Congress. Today, she is the ranking member on the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, which is perfect given that the 9th District hugs the Lake Erie coastline from Cleveland to Toledo. Congresswoman Kaptur is also the first Democratic woman to ever serve on the Defense Subcommittee. There, she's a strong advocate for national security, energy independence, and adequate support for the armed forces. She's also a member of the Financial Services Subcommittee. Welcome, Congresswoman Kaptur. So we'll give a warm welcome to all of our panelists, and we'll begin. Before we begin with questions, I would like to invite each of the panelists to make opening remarks on the topic of transportation. So we'll go down the line, starting with, if you were to explain the unique qualities, strengths, or weaknesses of infrastructure in Northeast Ohio, what would they be?
I'm going to pass on the opening remarks and leave the time for our panelists.
Go for it.
Well, first of all, I want to congratulate the City of Cleveland for getting the convention coming in 2016 and all the hard work you did for that. I think it's going to highlight Cleveland and Ohio and the country, and it's all positive. It's going to be great, so I'm really looking forward to that. And I also want to mention, in Congress you talk about things that don't get done, you hear about things that don't get done. Well, we did something just recently. We passed on a major piece of legislation. The last time it was passed was in 2007. It's called the Water Resources Reform and Development Act. And this is really important to this area because what we did in this is the bill that authorizes the Army Corps of Engineers projects and also the processes of the workings. And what we did, we categorized the Great Lakes region as a system. And that means there's going to be more money coming into the Great Lakes for the area for dredging projects and harbor port projects. And specifically here in Cleveland, I was just up here a couple weeks ago with Will Friedman, and I can tell you the Port of Cleveland's doing an excellent job under his leadership and expansion. And we got the dredging done here this year. We didn't put it out in the lake, and we're working really hard for a long-term program. So that's one of the unique things, I think, with Northeastern Ohio. We've got a great transportation system, interstate highways, and we also have the lake area and the ports. And just give you a quick example. My district goes down to Knox County and Mount Vernon and other points, but we have a major company in Mount Vernon who is shipping, building these great big, that kind of like generators. They're huge. You see them sometimes when the trucks will be on those, where they have like 50 wheels on the truck, you know, going down the highway. And they were shipping it down to the river system to get on a ship to go over to Antwerp in Europe, and then further eastern Europe. And now they're starting to ship through the Port of Cleveland, saving $1 million and getting it there faster. And so this helps keep the jobs in Ohio, and this is one example. We're getting the port dredged here in Cleveland with the steel mill here 6 miles down the Cuyahoga River. It was essential to keep at least a couple thousand jobs, people employed, good paying jobs, and then they spin off from that. So the uniqueness you have here is we've got a good work ethic, we've got a highway transportation system that's second to none. We're in the, you know, you've heard the numbers, but how many people live within 500 miles of this area? It's most of the country, at least 2/3 of the country or greater. And then we have the river system, we're not too far from the river system. And then, of course, the Great Lakes and that major transportation system. So that's things that we have that are, I think, are huge assets moving forward that we can develop. And with Ron coming back, what else can you ask for?
First of all, thank you so much for the invitation. And it's a pleasure to be here. And Scott, you were just phenomenal. There was a lot there. Thank you for what you give to our country. And thank you to all of you for helping breathe life into noaca. And a sign of your effectiveness is that the Tiger Grants were just announced today. And this region has received the only one that Ohio will receive in this segment. University Corridor Project, the East 105th, 93rd Street Transportation Corridor Plan. So you have received your planning grant. And, I mean, think about that. So this organization is a very important asset that achieves national recognition. So congratulations to all. And that's a very competitive program. There simply aren't enough dollars, as Bob and I know, in that program to accommodate the whole country. I wanted to say also thank you both to your organization and thank you to the thinking and the conceiving that is possible regionally, continentally, and globally. The district that I represent, which is transformed miraculously through Columbus every 10 years, has allowed me to move along the 9th District along this coast. And one of the advantages of that is that in terms of certain systems, it helps you to see the whole of them, whether it is water cribs out on the lake for those 11 million citizens who draw their water from Lake Erie and the challenges we face there, to thinking about how to maximize the value of the Ohio Turnpike, or to think about how, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, to maximize the value of an instrumentality, a binational instrumentality, called the St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation, underline the word development. I was very interested in Scott's comments about financing and innovative financing, because we need your help in this region. I think we lag behind innovative financing proposals that take advantage of some of the assets that we have in the ground here. And I think noaca can really help us in that regard. Let me say one of my concerns, let me just be very specific, in terms of rail and our desire to be multimodal in our transportation approach, because I agree with Bob, we're in such a unique place on this continent. It used to be that the rail lines for commerce, not passengers, ran mainly east and west in the country. But with the opening of the Panama Canal, and by the way, we've received a lot more rail investment, whether it's Norfolk Southern or CSX, in this part of our continent. But if you really look at what's going on, at the moment, northern Ohio is in a donut hole. Because what's going on is the east-west lines are beginning to be crossed north-south to meet the reality of intercontinental development. And right now, though there is private sector investment along the north, there is real competition forming in a way that looks as though northern Ohio is being left out. And if you look at, and I'll ask Scott's help in this, if you look at the rail corridors being moved from places like Memphis through Indianapolis to Chicago, because northern Ohio can't figure out how to have passenger rail happen up here. And what you said about agreements is just very important, very important. Right now, the dollars that were set aside for working with the North Coast Rail Alliance that would extend Cleveland to Sandusky to Toledo and currently up to Detroit puts us in a rather unusual position. It's not done yet because of some complications at the state level right now. But think about this. Why would someone want to go from Cleveland to Sandusky to Toledo to Detroit and then to Chicago? If northern Ohio and Indiana don't work together and we don't connect to Chicago, believe me, and we don't connect to Chicago efficiently, Memphis, Indianapolis will figure out how to do that. So it's something that we have to really be very serious about so that we're not left out. And it is still a challenge. So I just put that one up on the boards for a second. I know our time is limited, but let me just say that the multimodality of this region is so possible, but we're not there yet. If you look at the St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation underlying the word development, if you look at our seaway and port assets, our rail assets, our air assets, and our highway assets, they are not fully integrated. Places that will win will have that done. And without noaca, we could never get there. So that is just terribly important regionally, but continentally, because of what's going on with competition globally. We have the opportunity to work toward that. The other piece of advantage that I want to put on the table for us, and that is if you look at a national map, and I'm on the Energy Committee because I believe America's chief strategic vulnerability remains energy dependence. And until we fix that, our lives are under duress every day. And if you look at the charts that Scott showed us up there, you can see what happens with if gas prices go over $4 a gallon, we go into recession. It's happened repeatedly for the last 30 years. So the discovery of natural gas here in Ohio and western Pennsylvania on a national map, we are the most important. The level of reserves is so huge, we haven't fully integrated into our thinking yet. The gas lines have been built in maybe other places. There are lines that pass through here. But the opportunity for us to have an energy economy that is fully integrated into our transportation and housing systems is incredible. We're just beginning to crawl our way forward. I wanted to put that one on the table because it is so terribly, terribly important. And the last thing I will say in the introductory period is that where we lack resiliency is in instrumentalities, financing instrumentalities and development instrumentalities that other parts of the country have. So if you go to the 17 dry states of the West, they have the Bureau of Reclamation. I hope you have a finance committee, an innovative finance. Take a look at what they've done over 100 years in our country. Take a look at the TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority, what they've done in those eight southern states. And then look at the Great Lakes and say, what's missing? What's missing? What's missing is an umbrella that leads us to major investment, public-private partnerships that achieve great development in places that were thought impossible, actually, to develop in generations past. So I would suggest that instrumentalities like the TVA, the Bureau of Reclamation, the Bureau of Land Management, taking a look at our port authorities here, our various authorities, transportation authorities, the St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation, and modernizing our thinking about how to use them for development is extraordinarily important. Thank you.
Lincoln had the Transcontinental Railroad, Theodore Roosevelt had the Panama Canal, and Eisenhower had the interstate highway system. What will define the infrastructure for the 21st century for the nation and Northeast Ohio? Is it a mode, or is it something else, such as principle like economic freedom or security? Are there overutilized modes or underutilized modes of transportation that we should prepare for?
Great question, Jackie. I think it is something more like a system that where all places count and where people actually make the most of their existing assets. Cleveland has a high industrial diversity index compared to the country. The country is given 1.0 by definition, and everything else is less diverse. Chicago is 0.84, Cleveland 0.76 is pretty good, but it's not all in the most efficient locations. Not as connected as it used to be. We don't make the most of it. Our workforce development is out of sync with where industries are headed. And people can't get to and from their jobs affordably. So if we're really going to make an economy that works for everybody, we have to think about making more out of those assets. You've got the rail density and the water systems to die for that most regions don't have. And you're using only a few percent of it. I was interested in what you said about the east-west traffic, Marcy, in that regard, because the railroads invested heavily south of Toledo in the North Baltimore intermodal terminal to connect the east-west traffic, but they did it deliberately to bypass your region, this region, and every other region, basically. It's a perfect example of what I call national and international value creation with zero local value capture. Where by contrast, Columbus helping CSX invest in the Buckeye Yard in town, not that far from downtown, turned out not to crowd things more. It's reduced truck congestion, increased employment, and given them tremendous sorts of leverage. So I think you really got to think about a somewhat bigger table. I know you're shuddering at that than you currently have, Grace, because if the railroads and the utilities and the banks aren't in the economic planning, then we're not there. You've been through this before on affordable housing. Neighborhood Progress Inc. is a world-class housing finance intermediary. You took charge of the situation and started helping Cleveland make something happen. Years ago, the Fund for Our Economic Future is a world-class economic development intermediary putting together the right kinds of initiatives for the Cleveland that you have. It's still largely a working-class economy, as well as the one you want to be. And you need to do that. Who's doing that when it comes to public investing in infrastructure? Where's the Center for Innovation and Invention? You know, the last point on this is you got to get your goals right. So you take that civil engineers report card you talked about, and you say the problem is crumbling infrastructure. So if you could push a button right now and put the billions of dollars in and fix everything we'd have, you would have a brand new state-of-the-art 1930s infrastructure system. And I don't think that's a good enough goal. So how do we get to that second half of Governor Kinshaver's question about the infrastructure that we turned out about and that everybody wants? It's that kind of play that I think will be as compelling as what Lincoln and Eisenhower came up with in the past. Thank you.
Well, I'd say, obviously, we've got to rebuild our infrastructure. We've got aging infrastructure, Bristol Maritime Highway, all the way across the board. It's off the engineer's report. But I think one of the key things going forward here in the 21st century is intermodal connectivity. We need all forms of transportation, and nationally we need to look at the transportation system as a whole. And they're all independent of each other. You know, if you bring the stuff in on the boats here at the Port of Cleveland, you can't get the stuff off and get it down to where it needs to be, efficient manner, then you lose out. And time is money, and transportation costs, that all adds up. And one of the reasons that in the past, the United States has been competitive globally because we've been blessed with a transportation system that we can move stuff better than our South American competitors and others. But we're starting to fall behind because we've got aging infrastructure all the way across the line. But we have to figure out how we put these modes together to make the trade-offs when they move down through the system. And I know down Rickenbacker in the Columbus area, perfect example of intermodal. I've been down Miami in Florida, what they're doing down there with intermodal. This is key. And when you look at the Panama Canal, for example, that's being expanded and deepened and bigger ships are going through. This is a kind of an unbelievable statistic, but of our top 10 economic ports in the United States, only 2 of them right now can handle those bigger ships fully loaded because they're not down in the depths, the drafts that they need to be. And so you can't have, you're going to lose efficiency if those boats out there have to go to the Bahamas or wherever and offload and then do it again. That's inefficient. So I think the 21st century, the intermodal connectivity is going to be a key thing, along with rebuilding and expanding our infrastructure is key. And we made a first big step on that on the water bill, on the maritime side. And one of the other big areas we did in there, we did a little bit in the MAP 21, the last highway bill, I like to call it the 18-month bill instead of the 5 or 6 year bill. But some reforms in there. It takes us too long to get things off the ground, get started, get projects going in this country. I was over in China 2 weeks ago, and one of the places I went was the Shanghai Deepwater Port. It's 19 miles out from the coast on an island that they expanded to get to the deep water. But they built a 19-mile, 6-lane bridge with shoulders. It's a bridge, it's an interstate highway. I'm told they built in 3 years. And one thing we did in WRDA, projects that got to get, the studies got to get done down to 3 years instead of 15 years. We put reforms in to do that. We did some in MAP 21 highway bill to get down to at least 7 years to get these projects going, because if we don't, if we live in a global marketplace, global competition, China and others are going to eat our lunch, and this is key. We still can do things in an environmental friendly way, but we got to get more efficient at it so we don't raise costs to our private sector and all this commerce.
Question is, what will define infrastructure for the 21st century? Is it a mode or is it a principle? I'd like to strike out on principle here just for a second. I like economic freedom, I like security. I also like the word sustainability, though for some in Washington that's a dirty word now, I have no idea why. I think with climate change, if we just look at this region, we've had a 38% increase in rainfall over the last 25 years. So the flooding isn't Mayor Sutherland's problem, or Mayor Jackson's problem. Nature is treating us in a different way. What a great problem to have, too much fresh water, if we can keep Lake Erie clean, which is another challenge. And so I think we have to advantage ourselves based on what nature is doing in a different, and we have to understand it. And from an engineering standpoint, we have to adapt to it. In one city that I represent, I was able to get federal money for sewers. Seems like I have to bring in a lot of money for sewers. And I said to some of the engineers, I said, you know, this is going through some pretty incredible neighborhoods, working class neighborhoods, but it leads up to a country club. There's a slope on the way that the pipe is being installed, and you're digging a mammoth hole in the ground for installations that are 8 feet high. You could walk through the sewer mains, right? You could walk through and through the freshwater mains. They were big, storm sewers and so forth. And I said, why didn't you think about doing something else with the hole? And they all looked at me and said, well, like what? I said, well, there's a drop. There's a slope to what's being installed. Could you think about water and power together? Well, when you're trained as a civil engineer, I'm sorry, and I love civil engineers, whatever they do in engineering school, they don't think about them together. And so the opportunity we had in that neighborhood to do everything from filtering lawn runoff and storm sewers that went into the big storm sewer, to putting little small pumps as the water dropped at different places as it moved to the sea. That multi-million-dollar investment didn't create a more sustainable place. It was 20th century architecture, underground. I have a lot of failures. I have good things in my career, they're not all failures. But I really felt like, wow, this was a moment like none other. And we failed the future. We took care of the past. So I would say that sustainability is important. I was talking to Senator Feinstein recently. She is my counterpart over in the Senate. And I said, if I try to tell the people of Ohio what's happening in California, what do I tell them? She said, tell them we're becoming a desert state. And there's a deep worry in California about where fresh water is going to come from. We have an asset that is so precious, we can't afford to let its reputation be damaged. And based on what just happened in the Toledo region, where 500,000 people went for 3 days without fresh water, believe me, it's the successor to the Cuyahoga River burning. And we as a region have to take hold of this and turn this around quickly, or it's going to affect development, not just in Toledo. It's going to affect it up in Canada. It's going to affect it here in Cleveland. And we really need a strategy, a region-wide strategy, to recapture Lake Erie's reputation by what we are doing and aiming towards sustainability. So I wanted to just put that one on the table, but fresh water, our assets, I mentioned natural gas before, fully accommodating what this means to us. And I'll just repeat, innovative financing structures for this region, which has been almost starved of those. Bigger mechanisms to help us get the dollars we all need. I see Commissioner Kalo sitting out there from Lorain County, who's such a great commissioner. Whether it's Lorain, whether it's Cuyahoga, whether it's Erie, whether it's Lucas, we need to compete with the Dry West and with the Tennessee Valley Authority with those financing mechanisms. Thank you.
I just want to add something. When Marcia talked about innovative financing in the water bill we did, I worked really hard to get what we call WIFIA, Water Infrastructure Financing Agency, which is analogous to TIFIA on the highway side, but public-private partnerships, and this is to go for what we mentioned earlier about wastewater and drinking water projects, because every municipality around the country has a challenge, combined sewer overflows, overcapacity, and that's part of the problem. We've got some issues in Lake Erie, because we got sewer districts that can't handle the extreme rainfall runoffs and overflows happen. And I wanted to mention this because I think this is really important. This is an opportunity, because I think there's lots of private capital out there that's looking for investment with a low risk. And if you look at municipalities in these two areas, wastewater and drinking water, with the state revolving fund, the default rate across the country is nil. And this is a perfect place for a public-private partnership. And so we pushing the EPA to work on this, get this program going, and also integrated permitting, where City of Cleveland, Toledo, whatever, can come in instead of a 5-year permit on this in this area, develop a longer permit to address the needs that they have that might be different than the needs of Dallas, Texas, and get some flexibility, but get to the ultimate goal of clean, safe drinking water.
I can just add a footnote to that. In addition to the federal leadership that you're talking about, the experience across the country is that whether it's the private sector or the federal government, cities and regions have to have some skin in the game. I mean, there just isn't enough strength to say, me too, and the money's going to happen. And those examples I gave, and hundreds of others, are of cities and regions who voted to tax themselves so they would have skin in the game and be able to negotiate for the matching funds, whether it was the grants from the Highway Trust Fund or the innovative finance loans and credit enhancement from TIFIA and WIFIA, we hope. And I'll add the Railroad Rehab and Investment Fund, which is less than 5% subscribed. I don't mind saying that publicly right now. So the question becomes whether, in fact, people in this room representing the entire region that we're talking about are willing to participate in looking at this slightly differently than you had, looking at the actual cost to each of your communities now for business as usual versus the benefits, both the financially tangible benefits and the intangible important benefit that Congressman Capper just talked about your reputation and the access to the resources that you have. Because if you can do that together, the evidence is you're not really taxing yourselves. You're making an investment and you're going to get a return on it. And I think that's the missing link. I think it's great that you got with you going, and I think it's great that Congress is considering a bill to make it easier to get the railroad finance money flowing more quickly. And what both of you said about expediting the good stuff, which means slowing down the bad stuff too, is essential. You don't have forever. A good idea, unlike fine wine, doesn't get better the longer it sits on the shelf. I mean, you expect to get something in real time for all of this, and that's your challenge, I think, is to set the table in a way so that people actually see that there's a bigger play.
Well, and in fact, if I had to answer the question, what do I see, or how does NOACA see transportation in the 21st century? I think of it as a very simple math equation. 5 counties plus the city of Cleveland equals 1 region. And we have to think more regionally. We have to understand that what we're working towards is a win-win. In fact, win, 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 win. 6 times. 5 for each of the counties, 1 for the city of Cleveland. We all win. And we have to recognize that.
Since I have such an intelligent audience and panelists, I want to throw this out because I don't have an answer to this. But in trying to find the way to finance the improvements to our combined sewer overflows and addressing the nutrient runoff that is feeding into Lake Erie and promoting the algal blooms that are causing problems on both sides of the international date line, or excuse me, the border with Canada. One piece of data I don't have, and I've asked for, is within the watersheds that feed Lake Erie, what are, for each mayor's, for each city, for each county, for each water district, for each sewage district, what are the bonds that are currently out there or means of financing current and future improvements, current function, future improvements? If we could aggregate those, what are the terms on those bonds? Short-term, medium-term, long-term? What is the interest rate? If I could take a look at that, and I talked to EPA Region 5 about this, I said, can you array this for me, for our region? And then let's see from the federal level, if we could lift some of the burden off of the localities together to extend the term. Believe it or not, out west at one point they had a 50-year bond. Can you imagine a 50-year bond? They were able to get the federal funds rate, so you would lower your interest. Imagine if we could do that over a region. Imagine. Other regions have figured that out.
That's kind of the concept of WIFIA. WIFIA is to add on to the state revolving fund, it's not to compete with it. But we put a provision in there where they could aggregate, because there was a minimum amount on WIFIA, but you can aggregate it and get up to the bigger numbers. So because it was initially thought to help the big cities of Dallas and maybe the Cleveland of the world, but the smaller municipalities that could aggregate to that level with the backing of the U.S. government behind it, the interest rates are lower, and then that's the whole concept. And I don't have it off the top of my head, but I know in my discussions with the water people around that come to see me all the time, it's significant. A quarter of a percent, 0.5% on the rate when you talk these dollars, it adds up to a significant amount. So that's the concept of WIFIA.
Under current law, most federal highway funding goes to state departments of transportation, while a portion gets sub-allocated to metropolitan planning organizations such as NOACA. When it comes to funding for regional transportation projects, what is the proper balance between state control and local control? What role should locally elected officials have in transportation decision-making?
I'll take that first. If it was up to me, I would just block grant the money from the federal government, let the states and local counties do what they want with it. Get away from the silos, you know, so much has to be spent here, so much spent here. I think it's best determined at the local and state level. And one of the templates, I want to go back to the water bill, because I think this is important. In the past, last time a water bill was passed was 2007, and it was about, I think, this thick, and it was all earmarks. It was called the earmark bill. And now, because of what's happened in Congress, we don't have earmarks anymore, so we had to figure out a way, how do we do a water bill without having earmarks? Because you're telling the Army Corps what the project's going to be. So we set up a mechanism, or the other option was you just default to the executive branch. And, it doesn't matter who the President of the United States is. I don't think it's a good thing for the legislative branch to default to the executive branch on this. I think it's a constitutional issue, really. And so what we did, we're setting up a system in Florida where at the local level, the Port Authority, the mayors, your local elected officials, state reps, state senators, congressmen, people, and the governor and all that, identify the challenges out there that come under the federal role in this regard, the Army Corps of Engineers, okay? Identify that. And every year, the Corps then is required to send a list of those projects around the country to my committee. Now, we can't add to that list, because that would be an earmark, but we can prioritize that list and we can authorize or not authorize the list, okay? But so what that does, it keeps it back in local control, developing the challenges of the projects, and I think it's obviously more transparent than some of the, that's one of the reasons why earmarks got such a bad connotation, and there should be more accountability. And I think in Ohio, we kind of do that on the highway side with the track project process and everything, but we can build on that. So 18.4 cents per gallon gas goes to the feds, comes back to the states. The states have their state user fee. But I would like to see more of it done at the local and state level, and we just block grant that money back and not put strings on there how you got to spend it. So much on rails, trails, so much for mass transit or whatever. I just say that should be up to the state legislators and the local people.
I had the privilege of helping draft the 1991 Intermodal Surface Transportation Efficiency Act, and the leaders, both parties, bought into, I think, a couple of really good principles. One was make the money flexible instead of the siloing. The second was put the locus of decision-making as close as possible to the people that had to live with the consequences. And third, start to make the most of the systems that you already have before assuming that all changes would require new ones. And going along with that, fourth, it goes with the third one, make the most of the communities that are being served before you build new ones too. And I don't mind using the S word. This was an anti-sprawl effort. It was controversial at the time, but we'd come through the experience of disinvestment by banks and financial institutions from cities, and we felt that it was time, as did people like Senator Moynihan and Congressman Mineta and a whole lot of others, Dave Grohl, that it was time to really change that. Now, it worked better in some places than others. It worked best in the 13 states of the United States, where states are in a planning compact with local government. They have to do things together. Localities don't get the revenue sharing unless they plan in the way that's being talked about. And it works the other way around, too. The states don't get the support from local representatives they need for their budgets unless communities go around. So those are those 13, and then there's the rest of us. And most of the Midwest is in that rest of us sort of bucket. And there's a reason why transit spending is as low as it is. It's because those principles aren't adhered to here. We worked with Governor Strickland's administration to come up with a new set of goals for the track. And those were implemented, and then they were reversed. So Ohio, congratulations on getting the Tiger Grant. Congratulations on the previous ones that paid for the rail improvements. But Ohio's not done as well as it could have by the federal system because you weren't ready. I mean, I'm just going to say it flat out. just weren't ready. You've got some great high performers in this room that know how to get things done, but you don't have the bigger systems that some of these other places do to make the change happen. So what needs to happen going forward, I think, to answer your question, Jackie, is number one, that you have to start treating the Highway Trust Fund and the other federal resources as scarce resources. It's really never been an unlimited bucket of money, and it's what you can leverage with it in the way of matching funds that will make a difference. And number two, you have to start looking at this as a return on investment proposition. The question is, who yells the loudest, who has the biggest vote on the committee, as much as what's going to come back. I had the privilege of testifying to your Assembly's Finance Committee once on why they shouldn't cut back transit funding even further. It was one of the most educational things they ever had to do. It was clear the discussion here needed a mediating influence, and these issues have to be pre-processed, and that's why regional organizations like this are important, and that's why you're going to need to invent some other kinds of things, as has been suggested, in order to get the resources going forward. So I would block grant it too, but you're going to be surprised when I say this. On paper, it is block granted right now. We took 100 separate programs and put them into 7 big buckets. 72% of the funding is flexible. And Ohio exerts less than 1% of that flexibility that it could to be responsive to local needs. So if you don't treat state government as a serious partner in this, even if they haven't been acting in it, wants a use it or lose it sort of opportunity. And Congress can fix it again, but unless you actually get accountability from the states on how this stuff gets implemented on the ground, you'll continue to be in the same situation you are right now.
And finally, I guess I would opt more for a balance between local, state, and federal. Practical example, and I'm not against block granting, but what's been happening at the federal level is block granting has occurred in other programs, and they're block granting less back. And for the state of Ohio, when it gets a hold of money, what is done recently is to eliminate all local government funds. So when you give the state money, why should we think that they'll make any better use of it than the locality or the federal government? All right? So I think we have to look at the balance issue very carefully. Case in point, and I sent a letter this year back to the state of Ohio because we had been able to appropriate $938,000 for the rail passenger planning up here in northern Ohio, and it was not able to be achieved, and they want to take the money back, say, no, that money belongs to noaca, that money belongs to Sandusky, that money belongs to Toledo, so that we can plan the North Coast Alliance, the North Coast Rail Corridor Alliance here, and we're in a fight with the state right now to give you the money that passed Congress. So I think it's important to have that balance. The other thing, I have a map in Washington. I used to be on transportation appropriations, where before there was an interstate highway system, and I can't remember whether South Dakota and a adjoining state, there were 2 highways. One came together here and one came together here. The states couldn't figure out how to connect the roads because of the politics within the state. And boy, am I going to say something controversial now. Turnpike. Since the 1950s, toll road. We have paid for it over and over and over and over and over again. So the state of Ohio, and then along the way, it became I-8090. How much federal money do you think has gone into the turnpike in 50 years from the federal government? Who said 0? You win the prize. 0. 0. When the money for the interstates went to the state of Ohio, where did they put it? Guess what? The toll road kept paying and producing, costing us. It's a tourniquet. It's the only toll road that I know of in the state. Maybe there's another big one about that I don't know about. Just think about that. For us in the north, the entrepreneurial north, where our top 10 employers are not the public sector, but private enterprise, paying all of this for all these years, and we're still here. They didn't drum us out of existence. right? But you look at the rest, so when you give the money to the state for highways, where do they put it? Wherever, however they've gerrymandered the lines down in Columbus, and they figure out how to push money into places, and if you don't believe me, go on to I-30, US 30, across Ohio, from one end of the state to the other, and say to yourself, wow, all paid for with your federal gas tax dollars? And then drive the turnpike, pay the tolls, and spit bullets. Because you can see the unlevel playing field that we deal with if you only depend on the state. So one of the reasons I'm glad they put a portion of Cuyahoga in my district is for me to say we need wisdom on the board of the Turnpike Authority. We need wisdom. And we need to look at that corridor as an underdeveloped asset of enormous potential. The state is still trying to take away dollars from it, right? They figured out a real clever way to do it now, fancy words and all. But essentially they're draining resources from the part of the state that's been taxing itself for almost a century. And they didn't use it for a fiber optic corridor, for a green energy corridor, for a passenger rail corridor, for a natural gas corridor. There's a lot of things you could think about to do with that corridor, completely underdeveloped. Do you trust the same people to handle the next 50 years? Thank you for allowing me time on the program.
Just for tongue-in-cheek, Marcy apparently hasn't been on Route 30 East again.
I drove the whole length and I thought, oh, how interesting. All paid for with federal.
There's a big push to do a 4-lane from Camden to Pittsburgh, but nothing's going to happen anytime soon.
Make it a toll road. Make it a toll road. Feel what we feel, Bob. Feel what we feel. Now, I will say, Mr. Gibbs is a very good gentleman. And if you come up with an idea he agrees with, I will support him. I will support him in the Congress, whatever that is.
Next question.
How do you see the role of metropolitan planning organizations changing in the future as our infrastructure continues to age and as funding challenges become more acute?
I know I probably should answer this, but it's much more fun listening to them answer, so I'm going to go ahead and let them answer.
So when MPOs got started, they were called transportation studies, and their principal role was to draw maps of where the interchanges would be on the interstate highway system. It's changed quite a bit since then. And it's clear from the discussion we've had today and the intervening years that MPOs need to be able to actually take leadership. They need to be able to convene. It can't just be government talking to government. The economy's a lot bigger than that. That the places within regions have to count as much as the sectors and interest groups within the transportation industry have to count. I mean, the average MPO in the United States, 5% of the numbers represent localities, 5%. So it doesn't meet the sniff test of proportional representation, and yet it's taking on governing abilities. And as we've all said, it's got to be performance oriented, not just be expenditure oriented. It's got to provide a return on investment. And like I said, you've got really good people here in Northeast Ohio that have figured out how to finance real estate, some of the toughest property in the country. You ought to be able to pull those people into the process, give them a seat at the table, and figure out how to help you finance the infrastructure that we need today.
I would just say that Scott's right. You can't be government talking to government. And obviously, the different communities have to talk to each other, but you also got to engage the private sector. And I think come together and kind of, now I'm going to use, I've really been excited about what we're seeing in education, where the public sector and the private sector, especially in higher ed, are partnering more to look at what the jobs of the future are and making sure that we're training these kids are getting the education they need to get a job. And it's kind of the same thing here. You got to be working with the private sector and their needs, and then be innovative and think outside the box. How are we going to finance this? How are we going to, where the resources are going to come from? And we haven't gotten that part of the discussion yet. But I think that's, we've got to engage the business community because they have needs, and it all comes together. I don't know how many business people are here, if it's all government people, but I hope there's some business people here and participating and engaging with their local leaders. Because what I was trying to say on our previous discussion, local input has to be paramount. We're going to state. I know Marcy has some issues with the state. That's fine, but but the local input has to happen. And that's why you have your state legislators, and they should be involved and engaged. And it's a lot better than a bureaucrat in Washington D.C. deciding what you need out here.
Well, on that note, let me just say, here's how much, this is how equitable the state of Ohio is, okay? You have a state that is called Ohio's the heart of it all. It's Ohio. In every presidential election, we're a key state, right? We vote half and half, 50-50. We have 16 congressional seats. So if your math is good, you figure if you vote 50-50, 8 of your representatives should be Republican and 8 should be Democratic. Or if you're going to Jimmy rig it a little bit, then maybe you're going to have 7 and 9. Maybe you'll have 6 and 10. But where it is today is 4 and 12. Now, Americans, regardless of party or independent affiliation, want to be fair. At least most of them do. That kind of suppression of interest is a crime. But that is what is going on. So I use that as a measure of how much to trust the state. How much to trust the state. Now let me say this, in terms of metropolitan planning organizations, we have to leverage our investments effectively. We have to look at the cumulative value, whether it's our sunk investment in the ground, whether it's the unrealized potential of the turnpike, whether it is looking at bonding power and an umbrella over a region. I think Bob and I agree. I think that the role of the private sector in partnering in some manner with public sector visions is very, very important. And so I think that's how MPOs will advance over the years, to have much more robust engagement with private sector interest. Example, where we could use it in the western half of the state in a place called Findlay, Ohio. If you depended on the public sector to handle the flooding down there, believe me, they haven't delivered. If the state of Ohio were such a progressive state, Marathon headquarters wouldn't fill up with 8 feet of water every time there's too much of a rainfall. So it's essential we partner with the private sector to push the public sector where it isn't doing its job. And so I think this partnership is an important one aimed at investment, opportunities for investment, and how to finance the future.
I will add that noaca, and particularly the board of directors, has recognized the importance of public-private partnerships. They've recognized the importance of making sure, as we look to transportation and environmental investments, that we understand where the needs are and that we are satisfying the needs of the working community, the folks who commute back and forth for work, but also the employers who employ them, and those who use the transportation system for moving goods and services. We're currently in the process of really beefing up our freight planning area, and we have recently established a business advisory council that will seat business leaders from our community to be engaged with the board of directors in that decision-making process.
Can I see a quick show of hands? Are there any investment bankers in the room? Are there any people here from banks? Is anybody here from community development financial institutions? Islanders. Well, now come on. Everybody's saying we need to do this. Now let's look at ourselves and who's in the room. How many people here are under 30 years old? Wow. I won't ask what the average is here. So, a quick story. Grand Rapids, Michigan reached reached a point some years ago, the business leaders and government got together. They wanted to rebrand their place as the kind of thing that would be attractive, young, dynamic, energetic, globally connected, all that good stuff. They went through training to think like really smart, continuous improvement type people. The CEO of Herman Miller Furniture took time off to whip everybody into shape and make it work. They all went out, they set a goal of marketing to the smartest grad students in the world to come there and live there, and they reported an identical experience. They interviewed well, they loved the companies, they stayed overnight, the next morning they walked around Grand Rapids, and 100% of them politely said, no thank you, we'd rather live someplace else. So the question is you say, what else does an MPO need to be? It's got to look to the future, as Marcy was just saying. A guy once taught me from Texas Instruments who was in charge of continuous improvement. He thought I didn't get it. He said, look, goddammit, Daddy always taught me you got to shoot ahead of the duck. You get it? So the question is, where is the economy going? Where's the population going? If you can't do that right, it won't work. So Grand Rapids leaders turned around, and business finally admitted they had to work with the community. And that was a step forward, and Grand Rapids is in great shape today because of that. They started actually paying attention to the place where their businesses were, and government started paying attention to who was living there and who was producing the wealth there, and it all worked a lot better. So I think the question becomes, how do you make the business of what noaca and the other MPOs around here are about essential? How do you make it trusted? And that's why I think it has to be much broader and engaged. I would hope a year from now to come back and to see a healthy show of hands to obvious questions like that if we're really going to make a difference.
Well, let's imagine that it is a year from now. It's 2015, and it's the day after a new highway bill is signed. What should this bill be known for?
More money.
Okay, it's 2015, right?
Yes.
Must be,
One year ahead of time.
hopefully it's June 1st and the 5 or 6 year highway bill's done. Because we need a long-term highway bill that brings certainty for the private sector, for local governments, communities, to know what the planning and all that, and that saves money. So I don't have a crystal ball exactly saying what exactly is going to happen. But what's held up the highway bill, the reason we only, on map 21, the last highway bill, instead of being a 5 or 6 year bill, was they say 24 months, it's really 18-month bill. It's because Congress hasn't figured out how they want to provide the resources. Now, and the way it works in Congress on the House side, the Ways and Means Committee does all the taxation, and that's all in their jurisdiction. What we try to do at map 21 on the Transportation Committee, which I serve, was try to address on the cost side. And I'm a firm believer that we ought to be doing everything we possibly can on the cost side before you go to ask taxpayers or whoever to pay more. So and we've made some good reforms, I think, that are being implemented that help that and streamline that. And Ohio did get some extra money because they did some streamlining and some innovative processes to help the cost side that paid some incentives that was set up. And so that's a positive thing. I don't really take out that. So that's where we're at. We have to, typically the gas user fee or tax, whatever you want to call it, has been the main funding for the Highway Trust Fund. It brings in about $39 billion a year. We typically been spending between $50 to $53 billion a year. That's been offset, supplemented with the general revenue tax dollars. And how we move forward is, I think everything has to be on the table. We have to look at everything out there. One is to raise the gas tax. There's a couple bills out there actually do away with the gas tax. I'm a little skeptical on those. And there's some other ones on there. One that I think has a lot of merit is we've got multinational companies here based in the United States that have businesses overseas. It's very difficult for them to bring those profits back because they start at 35% tax rate, which is the highest tax rate in any industrialized nation. And there's proposals out there. I would say, to simplify it, because it get a little complicated, but I would say let them bring that money back, tax it at 5%, all goes in the Highway Trust Fund, and the rest they can keep with no strings attached. Now this was tried a number back in the mid-2000s, and a tax holiday. Quite a bit of money came back, but under Dave Camp's proposal on this, I think it's about 128 billion over the next 10 years come back. So that's one way to do it, and then brings a lot of capital back to help grow the economy the other way. So there's just a few other things I can list off my paper here, but I think we have to start thinking out of the box, and we have to have this discussion. This discussion has to start happening right now, because May will be here before you know it. And we did get a short-term extension, so we didn't stop these highway construction projects during the construction season. But May will be here before you know it next year. And so we got to have a discussion, and the discussion is really on the revenue side, how we're going to provide the resources to do what we need to do.
Well, first of all, I think you're an optimist and thinking it's going to get passed a year from now. The way
Something will get passed.
Right. But if it's going to be more than just an extension of what we've got, there's got to be a good reason to do it. So I would hope that the new bill redefines progress to include economic progress, and that it's measured at the local, not just the state level, and that progress is treated rather broadly. You know, those numbers I was showing, the other side of it is, we did this once, if you add up all the capital and operating dollars spent by the public and private sector, almost in the United States, only 12% of it's governmental, and federal is only 1/3 of that. Oh, if I'm doing the math right, that means that only 4 cents out of every dollar spent on transportation is the federal contribution, which of course gets 100% for lobbying attention. So the question is, how do we make the most out of that scarce resource? It's obviously worth it for some good reasons, but you can't make it go any further than the context within which it's put. If it's only to do project spending, that's what you'll get, is some more projects. If it's to improve the economy that we have was rural at the time the Bureau of Public Roads was created. It's largely urban now, with still important rural functions in there. So that's got to change. There needs to be a recognition that where you spend the money is going to make a difference. That's the point of what that index is. I don't think Congress will get the trust of the American people if they continue to see the cost of transportation increase faster than their earnings. And that's been a problem. And unlike other things, we can't drive the price down by just producing more of it. If we got more people to buy more cars, the conundrum is the cost of living would go up. So I think what we have to do is to make cost of living reduction and efficiency and business retention and attraction and all the rest of that really count. And the states aren't set up to do that right now. The MPOs are barely getting started on it, but at least they're trying. And if we can empower them to do more in exchange for helping local communities learn how to do this right, then a year from now, or maybe 2 years from now, when I ask for the raise of hand, there will be bankers and investors and community development financial institutions and others in the room, because it'll be too essential to ignore.
I wanted to ask the audience today, if the Hoover Dam did not exist and a president of the country said, we're going to build the Hoover Dam, if you think Congress, we have a Congress that would vote for that, please raise your hand. All right, let's say you had a president that said, we're going to land a man on the moon. We're going to go into space in the national interest. Do you think we have a Congress that would do that? If so, raise your hand. What if we had a president who said, in the nation's defense, we're going to go up into that area called the Great Lakes and build a St. Lawrence Seaway. We're going to create this series of dams and these very low lakes, and we can't make them very wide. We'll put these locks in. And do you think that we would have a St. Lawrence Seaway Development Corporation if it came before a vote before the Congress today? No. I think what's happened to America is, for whatever set of reasons, we've lost some of our will to do great things for the country. When you can't pass a transportation bill, that's bread and butter. When you can't pass an agriculture bill, and I saw Bob fretting over that for years, there's something fundamentally wrong. with the way we're doing our politics. And so I think America has to take a deep breath and get her wind back. And I think that we have to envision and aspire and do great things again. And we can't be afraid of whatever the big-pocketed donors and all this other stuff. One of my colleagues is running for office in a state not far from here, putting $9 million up against him. $9 million. And growing. It's only September. So this kind of interpartisan warfare within each party, Bob can't say it, maybe I can. People in his party afraid of primaries. People in my party afraid of never having enough money. Whatever. You know what? We got to get over this. We got to go through this firewall, and we got to aspire to great things again, including passage of bread and butter bills, and be willing. And I'll tell you this: I'm afraid to go speak to Bob Gibbs on the floor of the Congress because I don't want to get him into any trouble. Now I joke around, but rarely does anybody from his party come to our side of the aisle, and there's a reason for that. And we got to fix that for the sake of the country.
I've got a smile. This makes sure in the second term. Yeah. And one thing, it took me a while to grasp this, but something's happened in our country in our life, most of our lifetime, my lifetime, Marcy's lifetime. And when I was in the state legislature, something's different. And when they do the biennial budget, everything on the table. When we do ours in Congress, it's the 12 appropriation bills. It's what they call the discretionary spending. Now, back when I was a kid, discretionary spending was probably 2/3 to 3/4 of the total spending. That's pretty much flipped around now, where the spending, the discretionary spending would be to run all the federal agencies, run NASA, run defense, things like that. And the other part that's upside down now is your entitlements and interest. And you know, nothing against the entitlement programs. We need safety net programs. I'm not against that. Don't read that wrong. But when that is growing automatically, and the others is shrinking, the pie is this big, and that's the problem. And I'm sure that if it came up to a vote in Congress, and if we had our fiscal house in order, if it was to put more money in the NASA, more money in the health research, more money in our infrastructure, those votes are there. But the concern is that the spending has been growing and growing and growing, and taking more out of the private sector. And that's the philosophical argument. That's the discussion that's going on right now. So we've just got to get our fiscal house under control and make these investments and have leadership to encourage the country to these investments are good. And you know, I'm on the conservative side, but I've been a strong proponent especially in my committee assignment on the maritime transportation system and flood mitigation. And otherwise, especially when I just came back from China, we are going to get our lunch eaten, and it's not going to be pretty. We've got to step up, but we've got to get our fiscal house in order, and we've got to get common sense regulatory reform in order. We got regulations that are killing us. We can protect the environment, enhance the environment, but we don't need a whole bunch of duplicate regulations that are adding cost. When I go out and talk to business people around the country and around the state, my district, the most thing I hear the most is the EPA is killing me, and we can do better. We can make an EPA work for us to protect the environment and not add a whole bunch of costs and put us unproductive in the global marketplace.
I want to thank you all for taking part in this conversation, and at this time, if anyone has any final comments they'd like to offer to finish up the panel discussion.